The first item is not going to be the river plan South Reach, but we will be taking testimony at that time. So if you're here and would like to speak when that in about an hour from now, please fill out a card that Julie has, write in your full name and mailing address, and put it on the pile, and we'll call you up then. We're going to start with items of interest from commissioners. All right, well, hearing none, we'll go to the director's report.
Good evening. Just a couple of brief items this evening. One, to remind the commission that we have our RIP. We'll bring residential infill back to council for amendments and the next public hearing on March 12th. And hope then to have, we're still working on council dates, but probably sometime in early to mid-April for final RIP action on residential infill at council. At the last commission meeting, you asked for an update on residential infill part 2. We're working on that. We'll get that calendared for the PSC probably in June. You also asked for an update on our anti-displacement work, and we're giving a report to council on March 25th on our anti-displacement action plan and the work that we're doing with community organizations. So we will schedule a time to bring that report to the PSC as well. That is it.
All right.
Those are questions.
Fantastic, thank you. Next, we'll have consent agenda. I'm not sure if we do these separately or together. Together. Are there any concerns with these? Anyone would like to pull any of these items from consent? All right, then please remind me, do we do a vote on this?
Yeah, I move the consent agenda.
Thank you, Chris. Someone like to second? Second. Thank you, Jeff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, consent agenda passes. And with the team, please come up. We'll start with Doza. So Phil and Sandra. Is Laura coming? Okay. Okay. Keep an eye on you guys.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Sandra Wood. I'm with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and with me today is Phil Namany, who is also with the Bureau, and as you said, Laura Lillard is on our project team, and we might have some BDS folks here also for this. This is our 7th work session on the Design Overlay Zone Amendments project. That includes your hearings. So it's not all work sessions, I think. Maybe, I'm not sure. Anyway, we're here today. I know this isn't the main item on your agenda today. You have a hearing for the South Reach, and we're going to limit our conversation for this part of the agenda to an hour, so you can start on time with the South Reach proposal. And we had just a few slides to go through. You should have received 2 spreadsheets from Julie for this agenda item. One has to do with process, and it's just a 2-pager, and then there's an 8-pager spreadsheet for the standards that we've talked about all of these items before. So can you move to the next agenda item? As you know, for DOZA, we're putting all of the proposals in 5 buckets. These are the 5 buckets you've talked about many times before. And what we have today is the list of amendments that you have been accumulating throughout all of the work sessions. So next item, please. Thank you. So what we wanted to do is share the count of amendments, because I know it's been probably, if you're like us, we've been going through all these work sessions and we haven't paused to say, okay, where are we now? So we wanted to just share what that count is and what buckets they're falling into. We wanted to confirm that the consent agendas items were indeed consent. So we'll move forward and start drafting those code amendments. And then there were some key items that you're sending to the 3x3 group. And as a reminder, the 3x3 group is 3 Planning and Sustainability Commission members, which are Commissioner Schultz and Commissioner Bortolaso and Commissioner Hauk from the Planning and Sustainability Commission, and 3 commissioners from the Design Commission, which is Commissioner Julie Livingston and Jessica Molinar and Chandra Livingston are going to be joining them. And those that group of 6 will be discussing some key items. Is the microphone, is that better, sir? Yep, okay, I'll speak louder. So then we'll send it to the 3x3. So that's what we're trying to accomplish today. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is what you have been working through in these, the past work sessions. You've come up with 77 suggestions for amendments to what staff has proposed. Those are divided into two main buckets. For the process, there were 19 amendments you're proposing. 10 of them are consent and are just going into our work. So we'll start amending the zoning code and bringing those back way in, I guess, in April. And 9 of those you are sending to the 3x3. So that green box. For the design standards, so if you remember for the tools, there was the standards working group, and including the standards working group and everything you've discussed here at the commission, there was 55 amendments you're proposing, and they're grouped into the 3 tenets of context, public realm, quality, and resilience. And then some of those are on consent and some of them are going to the 3x3 for discussion. So a lot of changes, but it's a big code packet. Any reflections on that at all? Does this help you at least understand the breadth of the work? I'm looking at the 3x3 folks in particular. Oh yeah. Okay. Next slide, please. So let's start with the process items. That is the spreadsheet that just has two. It's a 2-sided spreadsheet. There are, how many? 19 items on this spreadsheet, but there were 4 that we thought would be worthwhile discussing today. And if the rest of you wanted to discuss anything else, we're open to that also. The 4 that we wanted to touch base, and really what we're trying to do today is just put a finer point on what the PSC is thinking for this amendment so that the 3x3 representatives can go into the 3x3 discussion and know what type of information they're looking for or what type of advice they're looking for from the design commissioners. So does that sound good that we spend time on these 4? And then if anybody else has anything else on process, we'll move along to that. Okay. So let's start with item number 14. That is about, well, here, this is your part, Phil, sorry.
So item number 14 was an item to alter who would serve on the design commission. And one of the suggestion that was made, and we didn't get a total agreement on which direction to go, but there was suggestions to potentially add both a sustainability person or somebody with experience in sustainability practices, as well as someone who has experience in natural resource management. And part of what we were looking for in terms of a direction was, since we have, I think, 7 members total, and 5 members are usually drawn from architecture, planning, finance, development. 1 is from RAC and 1 is from an at-large person. If we were going to pull, the question that comes up is, does the PSC want to pull 2 members from those 5 and have, 1 be a sustainability person and 1 be a natural resource management person? Or do you want to pull 1 out of the 5 and have that be a choice between those 2? I know there was a lot of discussion about each of those expertise are valuable, and they also have different kind of gauges of what they would be interested in or what they would think would be important. But we left the last PSC work session without necessarily a clear direction on that, and we thought it might be worthwhile have a quick discussion on that to see if the PSC favors pulling 2, pulling 1, or what.
Any thoughts?
Well, I'll just reiterate, and I think Oriana was particularly interested in the sustainability end of things, and I was the natural resources. I think both are really critical to be on the design commission, and part of my rationale for bringing it up in the first place was the Design Commission itself in its deliberations regarding, I'm not sure if it was the context or what.
Quality and resilience. And
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Actually went into quite a lengthy conversation among themselves regarding the lack of expertise that they had. They articulated that they didn't feel they had the ability really to make a judgment based on performance of green infrastructure and so on and so forth. So I don't know. I don't have a suggestion for how to resolve that tonight, but I think it's definitely something we should have a conversation in the 3x3, and maybe through that process we can come up with something.
Jeff?
Question, Mike. Would you be comfortable if those expertise, the desire to have people with those expertise was simply called out and we encourage, I'm not sure who makes the appointment to the design commission, but we encourage them to have people with those sort of expertise. Again, the concern which I raised last time is it's sometimes hard to fill positions. And if you start pigeonholing too much, you risk having open positions for a while they kind of try to find someone who fits that niche rather than articulating the kinds of expertise you want and leave it to the good judgment discretion of whoever's making the appointment to go, what's our priority now? What do we really need to feel?
Well, I certainly would support that, as I mentioned in the past with the PSC itself, that I think it's important to have somebody with that technical knowledge on the PSC. And I'm hopeful that, I know I'm being termed off next May, I'm hopeful that there will be an effort to, through that process, to reach out and try to find somebody with that level of expertise, and I would say likewise for the whole issue of sustainability, which aren't necessarily the same. People have argued, there are two landscape architects on the PSC, one of whom I know quite well is Larry Santner, who's a great LA, but it doesn't necessarily follow that a landscape architect will have the natural resource skills. Some may or may not.
Oriana?
So I think the flip of what Jeff just said is that the word encourage can be overly soft, that it means then it doesn't happen because it's viewed as too hard, that the kind of robust effort that would be needed to bring both the expertise of natural resources and of sustainability or resiliency in the face of climate change doesn't end up there. I think that it's behooves like whoever's in charge of making these decisions, namely the mayor's office, to actively work to have a pipeline and a role of people if they know that they have to fill certain positions. So I would encourage us to, or at least the 3x3, to seriously consider having both a natural resources person and a climate resiliency person. To your point, Mike, I don't think those two things overlap very significantly. There may be some overlap, but for the most part, I think they're very distinct, and trying to say that one person should have one or the other, I think you significantly leave out both how to incorporate the natural world into design effectively, and then how do you actually address those resiliency issues and the really kind of technical knowledge around energy efficiency or like making a roof sufficiently solar ready. I think that's something that we've talked a lot about in this space and had a lot of interest in. And I think only as climate change worsens are we going to need those skills more and more, and only as climate change worsens are we going to need those skills around making sure that the natural environment isn't kind of subsumed in the urban environment.
And actually, climate change is a great example, because I can imagine on the mitigation side, there are definitely any number of issues that relate more to expertise regarding energy efficiency, and a lot of other issues on the adaptation side, green infrastructure and so forth, with natural and built green infrastructure. Those are different arenas.
I'll chime in. I think at the beginning of this project, I'm not sure I would have supported having two positions carved out, but learning the design standards, there's so much in them about green building. And if someone's going to go the non-standard route and go the discretionary route where there's the design commission, I want someone on the commission to be able to understand those issues well and how you can equivalently meet the intent. And I think that oftentimes that position might overlap with someone who has an architectural background. And the sustainability side of it, in terms of the natural resource piece, that might be new to the commission, but the de-overlay covers a significant amount of land area where there's natural resources, primarily is the element there. And I didn't realize how much overlay there was, so I think it's important to have that perspective as well. So I guess we don't have to have a hard answer here, but can we do a straw poll of people who think that there should be 2 earmarked positions? And if that doesn't pass, maybe step down into what Jeff was suggesting of having recommendations. So first for
And
2
can
positions.
I clarify one thing?
Yeah.
I think how this would all add up is there's 7 positions on the design commission, 1 for RAC, 1 a member at large, 2 earmarked for climate resiliency, sustainability, another one for natural resources, which is what you're voting on, these 2, and then that would leave 3 that would be from engineering, finance, construction, management of buildings, land development, design, architecture, landscape architecture, and urban planning.
What were the first 2 you mentioned? Because I didn't hear those.
The first were
The
RAC
first 2 earmarks, yeah. Right.
and at-large member. That is not from an engineering, finance, design, architecture, landscape architecture, and urban planning.
Okay. And would it be accurate that if someone were a designer, an architect, or planner, they might also, if they have the relevant expertise, meet one of these criteria? For example, be the green building or the sustainable building person. I'm not sure how many sustainable building people you would find who are not also
potentially, just
architects.
like the RAC member. At one point, the RAC member was also an architect, but
Okay.
was
Well,
a
the RAC
member of
mem-
RAC. But
Yeah.
The RAC member now
yeah.
is in LA.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
It's a
but,
landscape
but the
architect.
idea, and I think we did get a strong direction from you last time, was that we wouldn't group those subject expert field, the sustainability and natural resource, in those other subject expert fields that would make up the 5, but that we would definitely extract out either 1
Somebody
or
has
2
to.
dedicated spots, and whether it's 1 to one of those 2 or 1 each, 1 to natural resources and 1 to sustainability. So that would be very similar to the RAC person, kind of in that sense.
Kat?
I have found, having been on both commissions, that the thing that I find so powerful with this commission is the variety, not the extreme, of points of view, and then I think it makes our work much stronger and thoughtful. So I guess I'm not quite as concerned necessarily about the fact that you might have fewer architects or landscape architects on the. I mean, at first it kind of surprises me, I'll be honest. But then I think about this commission and the thoughtfulness that everybody brings to it. I guess the other question I have is, who says it has to be 7?
You do. and council.
Right? So we
council.
could
I was going to ask that question too.
make it 9.
You could.
Is it be another way to approach it? I mean, there's
7, 8, 9.
And it is a regulatory body. So there are, there's Design Commission, there's Historic Landmarks Commission, there's Adjustment Committee, and there's Hearing Officer, which is just 1 person, who are the regulatory bodies codified in the zoning code. You're a legislative body, not a regulatory body. So subdivisions, for example, just go to 1 person, the hearings officer. And it's a legal, it's a lot less discretionary. Design review is the most discretionary of the land use reviews we have. Just another point of data.
I'm glad Kat asked the question because there are 10 of us,
11.
11 of us, so
Yes, and you used to be 9.
magic about 7.
We do like odd numbers for votes, generally. So
9.
So one proposal might be to accompany what I just summarized with the option to the 3x3 that says if it feels too constrained, suggesting back additional positions. What do you think?
To what?
So the one recommendation we could have to the 3x3 would be to ensure that there's someone on the design commission who has a natural resource background and someone who has a sustainable building background expertise. And that would be a recommendation. And if the 3x3, in consultation with the design commission, who will be represented on it, thinks that really they feel only comfortable doing that if it went up with more members, then that might be something we'd be fine with.
Okay.
Okay, thumbs up or thumbs up?
I just
Thumbs down? Okay. Thanks. Good discussion. Let's move on.
great, thank you. Go ahead, Phil.
So the next item was had a fairly robust discussion. But it was about what the Planning and Sustainability Commission's role would be in formulating or amending the design guidelines. Right now, there's a basic sort of informal role where there's usually a briefing on that as part of a legislative project. And so there was some discussion about whether the PSC should actually be a recommending body. If they're a recommending body, who would that be to? Would that be a recommending body back to the Design Commission, or would it be that the Design Commission and the PSC are both recommending to the City Council in that situation? So we didn't have a firm decision on that. I was just going to see if there's any updated thoughts from the PSC before we go to the 3x3 on that and have that discussion, and see if there's a direction that we should be following.
Would anyone like to bring more attention to this one? I think, Kat, you suggested this one? Yeah.
I thought we left it in your court to help try to come up with some thoughts for us.
Is that
Throwing
right?
it right back at you.
Is that right?
If I remember correctly, we've had some similar discussions, or perhaps we did it in the Historic Resources Subcommittee, similar discussions about the relationship between the Historic Landmark Commission and ours as well, and when it comes to working through portions of who defines a district versus a landmark versus this versus, and how at times both commissions need to weigh in. I don't know if there's anything to be learned from that discussion or what's being proposed for that process, but it's just one thought in my mind. I don't even know where we're at with that, to be honest, because I think we're still waiting for that to come through. I proposed the thought that I think the PSC should be reviewing and commenting on the guidelines, and perhaps it's just like we did for this process, because I think whatever happens in the guidelines has to tie back to the standards, but I don't know that that's the ideal way or not.
So why don't, for this one, we'll check in with our colleague Brandon Spencer-Hartle, who's working on the historic resources, see where he's going with the Landmarks Commission, and then maybe come up with a menu so that the 3x3 can discuss it.
Right.
So briefing would be the least amount. There's a briefing here. You formulate your ideas and give testimony to the Design Commission like you did this time. There's the opposite end of the spectrum. You hold a hearing also and make a recommendation to City Council, which I have to say I'm not really a fan of having two recommending bodies to City Council. I think it puts them in a tough position. We do that a little bit with the tree code. The tree code we didn't have written that way initially, but Council changed. It changed your recommendation on how that was going to play out, and it's always a head scratcher every time it comes through. So we'll come up with a menu of options to talk to the 3x3 about for that one. Sounds good? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next one I don't think needs a whole lot of discussion, but it's something that we would like to see if there's a leaning that the PSC is making. It has to do with the DAR and the request to remove our provision that limits it to 1. And initially, the reason why we were proposing this idea with the DAR was to try to keep the DAR closer to being on track with an applicant's planning process, and also to create a situation where the public is not getting confused by what briefing or what session that they should go to, because sometimes when the DARs start going to 2 and 3 different dates, people start losing track of when they should come in and talk about it. So the idea was to kind of concentrate the DAR in one session, and then have the land use review be the actual session that people then have standing on and can testify and have standing for appeal. I know there's definitely interest both with designers and applicants on both sides, but a lot of folks do like having the flexibility of being able to come back for additional sessions with the Design Commission. Our intent was just to try to make it so it doesn't get extended out too long.
Any more specifics for 3x3 on this one? I would say last time this came to, I've heard pretty convincing arguments both ways on it, but also that it could be gained pretty easily, if I'm not mistaken. That you could do one DAR and say, okay, I've got a new project, and then do it again. Am I correct remembering that?
I mean, it is possible for an applicant to reapply. So, yeah.
Yes, Ben.
Again, just wanted to reiterate why this came up in the first place. I think while I appreciate the intent of following the design process isn't always linear. So you may start somewhere and you may end up somewhere else and need to go back to square one or close to it and revisit some of the decisions that you made based on input that you got as you went further along. So this is just a way to capture that possible feedback loop that otherwise you wouldn't have. I think there was quite a bit of testimony that was to that effect, basically vouching for more input, and that's very beneficial at the early stage of a process. That's where the DRR is.
Okay. Does anyone want to make a devil's advocate case that we should have just one DAR as proposed? Sure.
I could argue both of these as well, but at the same time, so the devil's advocate piece would be if the process, you want to have multiple DARs due to the way the process has been working. And if the process followed design process in lockstep and or there was more clarity in how to get through the process, you wouldn't need more than one DAR. So there's your counter argument. My other counter argument is a little bit more philosophical. There was a great segment I'd encourage you all to track down about why Japan, its largest city, Tokyo, which is about the size of New York, doesn't have a housing affordability issue. And it's because everybody's allowed to build housing by right, and there is no discretionary review. And it's caused the cost of housing to go flat. And it's stayed flat for years. So there's back to then me scratching my head of, multiple DARs and multiple DRs, and all this just elongates a process that, feeds into that whole notion that perhaps our land use review process is playing a role, more of a role than we can really identify or understand in the cost of our housing. So I guess that's the devil's advocate against multiple DARs.
Mike?
Yeah, and the caveat I would give if there are multiple DARs, I really do think, talking to neighborhood folks, that it is confusing. I thought that BDS did a good job of describing some of the changes they're making in terms of public notice and so forth, which is great. But it is an issue for neighborhood folks if the process goes on and there are multiple DRs.
Okay. We could either do a straw poll on this, or we could. Right now, the recommendation is to kick this to the 3x3. Is this enough substance? Do you think the 3x?
Well, we know where the design commission has landed on this.
I don't remember. Can you remind me?
So this was part of their testimony, which I think Commissioner Bertolaso pulled up, which is don't limit it to one. So I assume we're going to go into the 3x3. And the design commissioners will be representing their commission, saying applicants should be allowed to ask for as many DARs as possible. I think the value that what the PSC has is you're the ones who has it in your hand to change the code however you see fit. And what we as staff were trying to do is balance the needs of the applicant with the commission and the public. And I think when we did our assessment, the assessment said we should limit it, but our consultant also was kind of assuming that design was more of a linear fashion and that the commission shouldn't be going back on advice that they had given during a previous DAR. So if there was like several DARs, that they would say something and that the ball was continually moving forward, which is the concern that we have about having multiple DARs, because if a commission is talking about a project several times, then it's human nature to want to move that ball forward and to keep on designing. And then we get to, where is the public in that? They're already going to a neighborhood contact meeting. They would come to a DAR, if not one, then more. Then they'd also come to a hearing. So that's a lot of opportunities, which could be a good thing, but it's a lot of fatigue also that the public could be experiencing.
I saw Katie and then Jeff, and I'm going to remind us that Kat, Ben, and Mike are the 3x3 representatives. So if you heard what they said resonates, then that will be represented in the discussion. But Katie?
Well, it seems like there's, on one hand, on the other hand, but what about two? I mean, one does, what about having the limit be two? Does that make any sense, or is that just, that wouldn't help?
Jeff?
I guess in response to Katie's, what is this typical situation? I mean, how often are developers coming back for more than one? I mean, do you see serial ones frequently? Is it typical? I mean, what's the normal? What do we? How big an issue are we talking about?
It's changed over time. I think when we were doing the assessment, which started in 2016, it was very frequent. 2, 3 DARs, to the point that when we did our public outreach, a lot of people said the design review process is, the decision's already been made. It's already been made in the DAR, and then the design review comes in, it's one hearing decision, because they'd already seen the project many times before. I think that's improved dramatically since BDS has been doing their improvements. They've been doing a lot of administrative changes and allowing the applicant to do submittals over time, so that they submit just the application, site plan, elevations for the first, and then as the applicant continues to work, then they can submit more information. So I don't know if we've pulled numbers recently.
I don't think we have numbers. We do have, I mean, in a lot of cases, they were getting to be often 2 DARs or 3. To get the other answer with Katie's question, though, we do have an exception if something is more than one building. So if there's multiple buildings on a site, that 1 DAR limit doesn't apply. So that would allow them to potentially focus 1 DAR on the first part of the DAR on one building, and then maybe if there's a second building, they can come back for a continuation of the DAR. The one thing I want to bring up is my pushback, and this is kind of an idealist philosophy, but my thought was if our design guidelines can be consistently and are clear and consistent and can be, are maybe more universal in their application and understanding, then the fact that maybe somebody's project changed a little bit, if the DAR kind of goes over and says, well, here are the approval criteria, here are the guidelines that are important, here are the things we're going to be focused on. And if a project changes somewhat, that DAR should still have value about what criteria are important and what things should be focused on, that they could then take to the new project and still take that new project to a land use review. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that every time you change a project, you have to go through another DAR, but I think it's kind of back to, that might need a little bit more of a change of philosophy about what gets looked at for a DAR.
All right, I think maybe we'll move. Can you guys help me with time management? After this batch, are there additional batches for other future sections, or is this the meat of it? Number 17, I'm sure, is a bit of a juicy one.
Our next slide is about tools, and we just wanted to remind you of the main topics that are going to be discussed, unless any of you have anything else to talk about. We're not going to be going through the 8-page spreadsheet.
Great. Okay. So my suggestion is let's hit number 17.
Okay.
Anything else? And I'm hopeful that before the end of our time, we have a chance for people especially who are not on the 3x3, to share any kind of direction or thoughts, just free for all to 3x3 members, so that they know what we're hoping for when it comes back to us. So, should we do a straw poll on this one? Okay, so one recommendation is to stick with the current proposed language. I'm sorry, the current language says 1 DAR. So I
Correct.
guess let's do a straw poll for people who think that there should be one DAR. Looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the other option is to allow more than one DAR. Straw poll. We have two for that one. So we have a majority for sticking with staff's proposed language and representation. Ben, you can represent with the 3x3. Thanks. Let's
Sounds
go to the
great.
next one.
So number 17 was one that, and I don't think we're going to have time for much of a discussion, but this is something that we're really going to want to discuss with the 3x3. But it was the conversation about factors reviewed during a design review. Right now, we were saying that in general, FAR is not something that can be reviewed as part of the design review. That was what our proposal was. But we also, there was a request to also add potentially height to that, so that FAR height is off the table. And then the other item that was being suggested was we were proposing one exception to the FAR, not looking at FAR, and that was if there was an FAR transfer, infinite FAR transfer or unlimited FAR transfer being used in the central city within the sector, that that could be part of the design commission purview and part of the design review. And the reason for that was there aren't really any limits within the central city or provisions or standards that apply to that. So essentially, if somebody's able to work out an agreement with adjoining property owners to double their FAR above what the map would normally say is the maximum, they're able to do that. And we felt that there's a lot of contextual aspects and other things that may play into that decision that we thought should be under design review. But as you see from the items here on that was something that I think the PSC wanted us to consider pulling that language back out. And then the third item was just whether there's any other base zone criteria such as setbacks or things that should be not part of the conversation. And that would basically mean like if there's a 5-foot side setback that somebody couldn't request a 10-foot setback from the commission to potentially, lessen an impact on adjoining property owner. So I don't know if there's direction or if we just want to have that all happen at the 3x3.
So I think you all went round and round on this, and then
I actually thought
eventually
this-
said,
If I remember, I thought staff was going to come up with some possible items on this, but perhaps
our suggestion is
misremembered.
to limit it to FAR. The FAR is off the table, and that everything else is as written.
I meant options for us to choose because we were looking for ideas beyond just that one. I might be remembering this incorrectly, that we were going to have sort of a menu to choose from.
I know that for item number 2, the unlimited FAR transfers in the central city, that was a surprise to some commissioners and recollections about what the conversation had happened during the central city plan. And Joe is looking into that, but I don't have his outcomes
We anticipate
that one.
having some more information on that aspect
at the 3x3.
Okay. Jeff.
I was just going to go to that point that to respond to number 2, we kind of need to know what happened in Central City. I'm a little disappointed we don't have that for the whole commission if we're being asked to opine on it tonight, because that was critical to why staff was very uncomfortable with that, because Joe was pretty adamant that he thought something happened during the adoption of Central City on this. And most of us couldn't recall what that was. So I guess it's going to default to 3x3 to hear what Joe has to say. But I guess my starting position would be I'm not in favor of number 2 unless Joe has some pretty compelling record of what happened that would suggest 2 would be contrary to the intent of Central City Plan. So
Okay.
we can't answer that tonight.
Well, what do other people think about Jeff's suggestion to Ben?
The same point I was going to make. I recall that there was that conversation about Central City, and I think at this point probably be best to get that information prior to the 3x3 at least, and at least a clear direction on what exactly was the grand bargain during the Central City, or what was the message that was sent to the public.
Okay.
So from a straw poll standpoint,
Yeah.
I think the idea would be if we don't have compelling evidence from the central city that the intention was that FAR, the unlimited FAR transfer, was subject to design review. If we don't have that evidence, then from a straw poll standpoint, I would assume the PSC would want us to take that provision off.
Can we check? Straw poll, hands up if you think that we should follow what he said.
Okay.
Okay. Sounds like that's correct. Can we jump back to number 1 for a moment? This is one where currently there's discretion related to height during reviews, and we discussed about pushing to have height not be part of the purview of the design commission. So I want to make the case for that one. Kat?
I believe I was the one arguing strongly for all of these, but I thought we nuanced the language a little bit on the height one to basically make the statement that height is total, like height. You cannot reduce height, but they could play with how the massing. I can't remember how we did the wording. I had some proposed wording, but they could basically say, so if 325 is your set maximum height, they can't. Part of the building has to be able to be at 325, but you could shape the top of the building like that would be allowed. And I thought there was maybe more comfort in that as a path forward. And we finessed some language in the meeting.
Yes, I believe it was height across the entire site. I'm looking at my old meeting notes. So we will come up with maybe actual language that we can share with the 3x3, understanding that it seemed like the straw poll, people were more comfortable with this nuanced.
Let's check that again. Do you want to? So this would say height is an entitlement, but the design commission has some discretion to sculpt the building. So, and we can have a follow-up discussion on number 3 about step backs, anything like that, if you want to. But Jeff.
By sculpting, is that going to be discretion for the design commission to go, well, we're okay with 325 at this corner, but we want to sculpt a lot of it lower? Or do you actually see an objective standard? And I don't know what that would look like, but a percentage of the building shall be, or maybe, I don't know how you would do it, but in other words, it wouldn't be totally discretionary. There would be some quasi-objective, if that's possible. I don't know how you would do it, because I don't know what this looks like. I'm not an architect. I've never designed a big building. I don't know what an architect does or what a design commissioner does. I don't really like your height, but I could live with it if you did what. So again, how much clarity do we need in this sculpting idea? I throw that to the architects.
Well, we'll be talking with them.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's part of why I'm fighting for allowing the maximum height, because that's a tough question. But there are guidelines, and you're supposed to meet the criteria of the guidelines, and design commission is supposed to use the guidelines as a way to inform their decision making about the massing of a building. So, that's the criteria. I think we've talked about if we can get the guidelines and the standards to be lockstep as close as possible, then there would be there'd be some guidance maybe in understanding the standards. That's all I can think of.
My sense is that if design commission wants to thwart a project they don't feel meets the standards, and there's a 300-foot height limit for the project, and they say you basically have only a needle prick height, 300 feet, that's the way that they could use this standard. Same way, if you're allowed to have a certain amount of FAR for a project, they could say you couldn't have any FAR on the second floor. If the design commission will ultimately have discretion on this, and how they implement is going to be their decision making. So I'm myself comfortable with saying that height is an entitlement, and design commission has other ways that they can influence the design of a project. Other thoughts? Should we do it? So I guess I will call for a straw poll on that recommendation number 1, where height is an entitlement, and design commission still has the tools at their disposal to influence the design, including molding where the shape goes. Okay, I think you've got unanimous recommendation on that one. And number 3, Are there any other base development standards, setbacks, landscaping, building coverage that should not be considered in design review? Yeah, Kat.
Well, tied to FAR and tied to height, and where I've gone with these is when somebody's purchasing a piece of land, they try to determine the value of that piece of land by what they can build on it. And if approval is based on setting back the building more than is in the code, then you've just devalued potentially their land. So that's where I struggle with setbacks or height or FAR, because they all are kind of working together to determine, again, like that whole process of land purchasing. So I personally I think the other standards, I wouldn't go there. But I struggle with also including setbacks. Now, to counter that, you have to have the setbacks right. So as an example, Mike, you've talked a lot about setbacks along South Reach, and do we have the right setbacks or not? And if you don't have the right setbacks that we feel comfortable with, but we spend a lot of time doing that, then you might want more discretion at Design Commission to kind of encourage that to happen. Now, that being said, just because they can't force you to do it doesn't mean they couldn't encourage you to, for any of these things, to maybe consider scaling things down, or they would think it meets context in a certain way. It would just, if we put these guardrails, just mean they couldn't deny you because of it. But anyway, for whatever that's all worth.
Yeah, Ben.
To build on Kat's comments, I think if we go back big picture on the intent of the work that we're doing for DOZA, it's really to provide more clarity and more of a streamlined process. So to the extent that we can provide clarity to anybody who's looking at a piece of land right from the get-go, but it's to determine the value or what you can actually build, I think it goes a long way to provide that streamlined process. The more discretion there is on things like that can really make a difference in terms of what you can actually do, the harder it is to really know that ahead of time, and there's a lot of uncertainty connected to it.
Okay. Anyone else on the setback? Okay, so let's do a straw poll on the recommendation for number 3, that we not put setbacks as a discretionary element of the review. So that Design Commission would not be, do you want to say it better than I will? Okay.
I can try. I thought you did pretty good. I think it's just that setbacks are not a criteria that they can impose. Thank you. They could suggest a change in the setbacks. I guess the argument being we're setting setbacks just as we're setting height, just as we're setting FAR, and therefore it becomes a base entitlement standard and not a discretionary item in design review.
Okay.
So, can I just ask a very basic question? Does this commission think that design review is architectural review? Because now now that we've told them how much clay, that's the FAR, how tall the building can be, and then the setbacks are such, there's not that much left. So it's materials where the doors are, the awnings. I think what we heard from the assessment was that design review had gone really far down the architectural review to the end of the spectrum. And that maybe this should be called, and some of the urban design panel in Portland had said maybe we should call it urban design review, because that's what we're really concerned with, creating urban placemaking and urban spaces, not so much the details about the siding and the architecture and the roof mounted equipment and the awnings. So with these things off the table, I'm really struggling with understanding what we want design review to be.
Just to iterate, because I want to bring up I don't think people brought their code, but we were adding an additional paragraph about to kind of clarify what it is, but we weren't touching the first paragraph of what factors are reviewed during design review. And I just want to list what those things are, because from this
Page are you on?
discussion, if you have it, it's page 139 at the very top of the volume 2. But basically, we would have to remove some of these items, because it says here, the review may evaluate the architectural style, structure placement, dimensions, height and bulk, lot coverage by structures, and exterior alterations of the proposal, including building materials, color, off-street parking areas, open areas, landscaping, and tree preservation. So from what I'm hearing, I'm thinking, well, structure placement, if that means a greater setback, maybe no. Height, we're already saying no. Lot coverage by structures, well, that's another element of where the lot coverage is and the amount of setbacks. So it's like it starts to make me wonder if any of this paragraph is relevant. I mean, because then it gets back to like, okay, I'm just going to look at the shell of the building. So,
So it's interesting, as you were reading, I was like, there's only one or two things I'm removing off that list. Can I have the list again? So I guess interesting points of view, and both valid, I would say. So architectural style stays in. Structure placement, there's still a conversation to be had about structure, because it could be, you could talk about how a column meets the ground plane, what that looks like, what that feels like. Is there an overhang? Is there an arcade? So that's talking about structure. You're still got dimensions. We talked about setbacks, but we didn't talk about step backs. I purposely didn't pull that into removing that as part of the criteria. So step back shape the bulk, which is still in there. You're right. Lot coverage probably does start to be an item that's not applicable to this anymore. But exterior alterations would still be there. Building materials would still be there. Colors. Didn't talk about parking areas, open areas. I mean, so all that's still in there. I would also argue part of urban design is also so much about how you're relating to the ground plane, how you're relating to perhaps the buildings around you, and that can happen in so many other ways than just the bulk of a building. And like we said, we just talked about they could be step backs. I have to always think about both of those, whether it's glazing, whether it's where's loading happening, where's entries happening. So there's still a lot that's really important about how people interact with the building. That's which design commission spends a lot of time still discussing. And I would say they actually probably, at least when I was on the commission, we spent more time on those items than we really did on bulk and all these other items that we're just kind of pulling back a little bit. Anyway, that's enough for me.
Okay. Oriana.
I think also bringing us back to the earlier conversation about design commission membership, if you bring in someone with expertise around integrating design with natural environment, and you bring in someone around resiliency, that adds to the things that get discussed that maybe aren't in this paragraph, that maybe come, to your point, from having diverse perspectives. And those two elements certainly take design commission just as a body then outside of the architectural review space. So I agree with Kat. I think there's still a lot on the table, and you add diversity to that membership and perspective, and you add even more things that may be, interpreted through the guidelines from that expertise that comes into that space.
I'm not concerned that the design commission won't have enough work. I'm concerned that if, for example, they're looking at a site and there's some natural feature that they feel should be celebrated in a space, and maybe there's some, stormwater feature that could be a design element, a beautiful design element, rather than just a functional element. They couldn't say, let's increase the setback there to make this space on the side of the property more beautiful and celebrated, so that we can, see the water dripping and blah, blah, blah. They wouldn't be able to do that because we're taking away their power to increase the setback
So one responsibility to push that back to us to make sure we get the setbacks right.
on every site.
Well, in the code, yeah.
Well, and there is in fact a case before the Design Commission right now, Alamo, Manhattan, where there's a lot of interest in going beyond increasing the setback for stormwater management and so forth to further delineate the public and private realms.
Yeah, Steph.
Too. What I'm seeing is may evaluate, and evaluation doesn't. What I'm hearing that is, if you can evaluate something, it doesn't mean we're taking it off the table for discussion. It means that there is a differentiation of what can be a reason for denial. Is that correct?
Well, I think there's two paragraphs. The first one is a little exactly as you were describing. The second paragraph which is new language that we're adding, which is where we're getting into the conversation about what's on and off the table. So we would be adding height and setbacks to that second paragraph, which would clarify that those were off the table.
We're waiting.
So it's not a may, it's a regulatory stance.
We're getting close to our time on this. Should we do a straw poll to see where people are thinking right now, knowing this will be coming back to us in some form after 3x3? So let's do a straw poll for right now on whether.
Before we do that, I just wanted
Yes,
to voice just a general concern that I think, as the commission that sets the setbacks and the heights, it's impossible to create kind of a universal application. And so I think there is, to Sandra's point, I think there is some important value to the ability of the design commission to have the ability to kind of look at the site specific and look at the context and look at the needs, because on the setback point, it's not necessarily going to be applicable across in each site. So I just wanted to share just a note of caution as you're recommending and looking at this particular recommendation.
All right, thank you. Let's say those who think that there should not be a review role of the design commission in setbacks of buildings, raise your hand. Looks like and if you disagree with that, raise your hand. Okay, so it looks like we're pretty strong majority, but it was a mixed. And you will be on the 3x3, Mike, to share that perspective. All right, let's.
So I think on the, of course, the bulk of the amendment suggestions were with the design standards, but because a lot of them are grouped, and I think a lot of them we got strong direction from both the standards working group and then reaffirmed by the PSC. We didn't necessarily want to go into large discussions like we just did. I just wanted to point out, as you remember, there's 3 tenants, and some of the items we're going to be taking to the 3x3. Specifically to the first tenant context are the conversations we had about facade preservation and expanding additions to historic buildings. There was definitely some changes that we made to building next to landmarks, both commercial and residential. And also we've added some standards related to the river overlay. And you'll probably be getting some information about the river plan in the next one, but idea was to have some specific standards that apply to the river overlay down in the South Reach. For public realm, there were some conversations about being a little more nuanced with how we bonus or require ground floor height requirements. We had several weather protection awning type standards, and the idea was to simplify and consolidate those. And then there was the kind of ongoing conversation about parking areas. When should we give points for no parking? What do people think about pervious paving? Things like that. And so that was going to be part of the conversation. Lastly, for quality and resilience, there was some discussion about how the outdoor common space is oriented, and then also what kind of materials are allowed or allocated. And then we had some things to provide points for certain resilience and sustainability items in terms of the eco roofs and things like that, solar arrays. And the idea was to have a conversation with the 3x3 about that. Once that all gets put together, I think the PSC really wanted to see how the point structure worked. And so obviously that may not be something we'll probably have some initial discussions with the 3x3, but then that'll be coming back to the PSC.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So, real quick, next steps. We have been in contact with several of the 3x3 folks. We're going to be meeting with them in mid-March. We have penciled in a quick check-in with the PSC on March 24th. If there's anything that comes out of the 3x3 that we need to kind of maybe do another straw poll on. If not, then on the week of the April 13th, we'll be sending out the revised code amendments, as well as the guideline amendments, both to PSC and to the Design Commission. And then we anticipate at least one work session, hopefully a potential vote on April 28th, and we'll see how that goes.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I had thought I might do a go around, but out of time, if people have ideas for the 3x3 members, first of all, thank you guys for putting the time. We left you a lot and staff on this. So if you have any thoughts for them going to this, let them know. And
I do want to clarify, everything that we discussed today and the standards is really within the PSC's purview for making a recommendation to council. But what we're trying to do is coordinate with the design commission so that they're either not testifying against our proposal, your proposal, or that your recommendation is as best informed as it can be with the folks who are implementing.
so I was negligent and did not share our disclosures for this discussion. Should I do that for the record?
Sure.
I'm seeing a nod.
Yes, please.
While it's not clear whether the proposed changes create a potential conflict of interest for PSC members because the changes affect such a broad class of property owners, in the interest of transparency, we have the following declarations. Commissioner Smith owns property in the design overlay zone. Commissioners Schultz, Spivak, and Bortolazzo work for architectural or development firms who conduct work in Portland. And this is a reminder that we will continue the work session to March 24th. Thank you, staff.
Thank you.
And our next topic will be the River Plan South Reach. Do you have an idea of how many people have signed up to testify? 15? Okay. Then we probably can do 3 minutes, although we listened best for the first. Nope, I'm saying no. Keeping it at 2 minutes. Thank you. We'll do that. And for this discussion, Kat is going to recuse herself. We'll take a brief break for staff to come on up. And I'll remind everyone that people who want to testify can fill out a testimony card, including full name and mailing address, and give it to Julie. 2 minutes per person. And the only disclosure we have so far is that Commissioner Schultz will recuse herself from the South Reach project. We're going to take a brief break to get our snacks and begin. Thank you. Okay, we'll start again. We'll start off with Debbie. A brief. First of all, thank you for the beads.
Happy Mardi Gras, everyone.
Thank you. And we'll start with the staff presentation and then go to public testimony.
Great. Good evening, Planning and Sustainability Commission. This is Debbie Bischoff. I'm a senior planner with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. The South Reach team is pleased to be here this evening to present to you the River Plan South Reach, and we look forward to hearing from the public and hearing from you. As you recall, we briefed you at your last meeting on February 11th, so we're not going to go over all the details again on the plan. There are two key policies that guide our planning. One is a statewide planning goal related to the Willamette River Greenway. The other is our own comprehensive plan policy on the South Reach. And there's other state, regional, and local policies that apply. The River Plan South Reach is an update to the 1987 Willamette Greenway Plan. It includes a 20-year plan that includes a vision, policy framework, updated comprehensive plan and zoning map and code, and implementation actions to be completed by the cities and others. It also contains a natural resources and scenic resources protection plans. This is our plan area starting at the north end. At the very north end is the Ross Island Bridge. As we head south, the study area does not include South Waterfront, which is part of our central city, but it continues south to the city limits, except we do planning for the unincorporated Multnomah County urban pockets. So the riverfront area in the Riverdale-Dunthorpe neighborhood is part of this planning effort. So this has been a 2-year planning process. We studied existing conditions, we engaged community members, and produced plan drafts. Volume 1 is the bulk of the plan with policies, objectives, and recommendations. Volume 2 and 3 are the basis for some of the recommendations that you'll find in Volume 1. We met and conversed with hundreds of people at a variety of meetings, events, and tours. These included people who live, work, and recreate in the area. We also met with government agencies and worked closely with key city bureaus, Parks and Recreation, Environmental Services, Office of Transportation, and Multnomah County Planning. The project team also engaged interested Northwest tribes and the urban Native community. These efforts provided an opportunity to share project information and gain valuable insights and recommendations from different Native American perspectives. We produced 2 plan drafts in recent months, and that inform the proposed draft that is before you tonight. So the plan covers 4 topic areas, and I'll just briefly give you some highlights of these topic areas. Watershed health addresses climate resilient development, natural resources protection and restoration, and floodplains. Key zoning recommendations are to expand the river setback to 50 feet, apply the river environmental overlay zone, update floodplain regulations, limit exemptions for vegetation removal, and streamlining the landscaping standard. Other plan proposals call for preparation of a Ross Island Oaks Bottom complex, along with other East Side natural areas, a management plan for this area, determining climate change risks and implementing strategies, considering incentives to remove development in the floodplain, and implementing restoration projects. Recreation addresses physical and programmatic improvements to parks and recreation facilities, improving riverfront access, resolving conflicts between users, pursuing partnerships, and protecting designated public views. Key proposals include completing and implementing parks management plans, improving riverfront access to, along, and into the river, and for all different modes and recreation, providing limited retail sales and services, uses, and development at 3 park sites to serve recreationalists, and conducting partnerships to address boating conflicts and promote recreation, and upgrading boating facilities. Tribal engagement is about engaging the city and tribal governments on matters of mutual interest, protecting cultural resources, and expanding programs and projects that support Native customs, traditions, and culture. One key zoning proposal calls for cultural resources protection by requiring an archaeological survey in mapped high-sensitivity areas when there is site disturbance for development of a certain size. There are procedures in the code if resources are found. Riverfront Communities calls for expanding safe access to and from the riverfront from adjacent neighborhoods, improving transportation facilities and services, enhancing riverfront development and design, and supporting coordination with the Joint Office of Homelessness to address liveaboard boaters and houseless campers. Plan proposals look at future trail extensions, such as to Lake Oswego. Design recommendations call for repealing special design guidelines for the McAdam district that are from 1985 and replacing them with the DOZA, what you've just covered here, project new citywide design guidelines and a special character statement for the McAdam district that provides additional context for Southwest Portland development projects within the design overlay zone. Changes to the zoning code, and specifically Chapter 475, river overlay zones in the South Reach, prompted minor changes to river overlay zones in the Central City or Central Reach. Work on the Scenic Resources Protection Plan for the South Reach has also prompted changes to scenic resources zoning requirements in the Central City. We notified potentially affected property owners in the Central City of these proposed changes. At your upcoming March 10th PSC work session on the River Plan South Reach, we will share with you minor amendments on the proposed draft. 2 examples are provided today. Most are minor corrections for consistency and readability. In terms of next steps, tonight you're accepting public testimony. After testimony ends, and with PSC direction, staff will prepare for 2 follow-up sessions to work with you on topics that you want to cover and receive your recommendations on the plan in April. We will also be notifying the public and holding a Design Commission public hearing in spring to go over the McAdam District design, the staff proposals, and then receive recommendations from the Design Commission. The PSC and Design Commission recommendations will then be forwarded to City Council in the form of a River Plan South Reach recommended draft for a public hearing and final decision this summer. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie.
Yep.
Do you have a quick comment, Mike? And then
Very quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I mentioned last time, I was involved in the Greenway work back in 37 years ago. And I really want to point out, I've got a lot of comments, and other people, I'm sure tonight who testify will have comments on how to improve the plan. But I just want to acknowledge staff has done an amazing job, especially when I reflect back to the work that we did back in 1984 to 87. So I think it's important to point that out.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to start off this evening with invited testimony from Portland Parks Board and the Urban Forestry Commission. So let's start off with Jim Owens and Patty Tillett. Then we'll switch over to Megan Vandemark. And then we'll go to the public testimony. So, Jim, would you like to start?
Good evening.
Thank you.
I apologize for not wearing these. So I'm Jim Owens. I'm a member of the Portland Parks Board.
You need to put your mic.
Just push it. How's that?
I think it's on, but make sure I'll speak into it
Right.
loudly.
Little red light if it's on.
Okay, you're on now.
Oh, Julie can control it from afar, it seems. It's like unlocking a car door. Lock, unlock.
Your time's up.
High tech. Okay. Okay.
They get extra time.
All right, we'll start all over. I'm Jim Owens. I'm a member of the Portland Parks Board, and I'm co-convener of our Land Use and Infrastructure Working Group. And I'm joined by our other co-convener, Patty Tillett. And we appreciate this opportunity to speak to the plan with you tonight. And we appreciate your efforts to develop the South Reach River Plan. And we particularly appreciate Debbie's efforts to keep us informed during the plan development. She briefed us a couple times and helped us really focus on the key issues related to parks and recreation facilities. So why are we here? As the draft plan notes, within the South Reach, there are 11 public parks and open spaces. We have 2 major recreation trails, a variety of private recreation facilities, and 16 adopted public viewpoints and corridors. So it's a big deal for us. And what we're here specifically for is to express broad support on behalf of the Portland Parks Board for the plan. We have a number of things we specifically want to speak to, and turn it over to you, Patty.
Well, thank you, John. The points
Please
that we want
start off with your name.
I beg your pardon. Patty Tillett, Portland Parks Board.
Thank you.
We wanted to highlight a couple of points that we think are particularly important in the plan. The first of which is something that has been controversial in the past, which is allowing limited retail within the parks. You may remember that a year or so ago we had a similar discussion about retail in central city parks, and after much toing and froing, I think the virtue of that was recognized. And for 2 of the parks in the South Reach, we think that is also a good thing. There are a couple of reasons why we think they're a good idea. One is that they can promote some of the recreational and other open space uses. Another one is, of course, it provides eyes on the park and provides great convenience for people who are there. Something which is important to understand is that the retail is always secondary to and complementary to the recreational and open space functions. So that's something that we have supported consistently. Another point which I think has become important is expansion of the river Greenway setback from 25 feet to 50 feet. That's combined with floodplain management issues, but I think also we've become aware of the extent of riverine space needed for effective habitat and to preserve the natural qualities of the river. Another item which has been very much in the news lately has been support of efforts of the Joint Office of Homeless Services to minimize the impact of camping and liveaboard boaters on the natural environment and along the recreational routes. It's been a problem with which our park rangers have struggled. They simply don't have the manpower to deal with it. But now, with collaboration with the Joint Office, we are hoping very much to be able to bring that more closely under control. The completion of the Oaks Bottom Complex Management Plan is something which has long been an ambition. It includes planning for the future of Ross Island and the Selwood Riverfront Park, and publicly accessible swimming beach at Oaks Amusement Park, if indeed that comes to pass. A couple of other items. One is the purchase of Ross Island for public uses, which has been contemplated for a very long time. Another is the creation of Riverfront Park in the Brooklyn neighborhood. That was identified in the 1991 neighborhood plan that the city adopted at that time, and it would re-establish Brooklyn's link to the river, which seems a valuable thing to do. The last point I wanted to raise was improvements to the Springwater Corridor and the Willamette River Greenway trails to reduce conflicts amongst users and to make sure that there's equitable access for users of all abilities. They're not quite there yet, and they need to be. Jim?
Yeah, just a couple more things we want to speak to. Speaking of the Willamette River Greenway Trail, we strongly support its extension to Lake Oswego, recognizing the challenges in that. We're here to help as we can. We're also excited about the opportunity for a new park at the Staff Jennings site, and so we strongly support the designation of that site for such. We're really pleased about the emphasis on coordination with the Native American community, and we have a number of sites under Parks jurisdiction where we think we can help with planting and harvesting of first foods. So we're very interested in seeing that. We're also very interested in helping as we can with rulemaking by the State Marine Board to address wake enhancing devices and the impacts that they're having on the riverfront. And then finally, we support the efforts to get Multnomah County Sheriff's Office back doing river patrol along this section.
So by way of overall summary, as Jim mentioned, there are 11 public parks and 2 recreational trails within the scope of the South Reach. They already have enriched the lives of many Portlanders, and we think that with the improvements that are being proposed now, it'll meet many more, it'll meet a more diverse public, and it'll fulfill their recreational needs more fully.
So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
I like the back and forth. It was sharp. Mike.
Quick question. I know Jim Shalin, on behalf of the 40 Mile Loop Land Trust, submitted testimony expressing concerns about some of the trail connectivity. Have you seen his remarks from 40 Mile Loop?
No.
Okay.
No, we'll take a look at those.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, Jeff.
Patty, nice to see you. You mentioned coordinating with the Joint Homeless Office.
Yes.
What's their plan? I mean, if they're able to put more emphasis and resources there, what would they be doing?
Well, I can't answer that specifically. It's an evolving situation. The problem is very clear. The resources are limited, and it's all a matter of doing the very best we can with the resources available. So I can't answer your question directly, but that's what we're doing.
Thanks.
All right. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll have Megan Vandemark from Urban Forestry, invited testimony. And after that, anyone who has mobility impairments or kids or something like that will let us know if you need that before we go to the list. So, Megan.
Hi.
Hi.
Good evening. My name is Megan Vandemark, and I'm here on behalf of the city's Urban Forestry Commission. I will share a few highlights from our letter dated and submitted February 20th. The letter can be referenced for more detail and clarification as well. First, I just want to say that we appreciate the immense effort it took to put this plan together. More than 3/4 of the South Reach is forest or woodland, and thus a significant part of Portland's urban forest. The Urban Forestry Commission supports many aspects of the plan, including increased floodplain protection, increased tree replacement standards, new seasonal tree pruning restrictions, and bird-safe glazing standards to reduce harm to Portland's resident and migratory birds, and proposed restoration of unique habitats, including Ross Island and Elk Rock Island. We're also aware of the pressure to remove trees and vegetation in order to enhance views of the river and Mount Hood. We support limiting the proposed standards to allow for view-related tree removal only for city-designated public viewpoints. The Urban Forestry Commission also has a number of concerns and recommendations. First, the UFC urges the PSC to widen the proposed river setback to at least 100 feet from the top of bank. The proposed 50-foot river setback would improve on the existing 25-foot Greenway setback. However, 50 feet is inadequate to provide a truly functioning riparian corridor and to meet city goals and policies for the South Reach. The extensive scientific literature that both the city and Metro used to base their natural resource inventories and riparian corridor policies on call for vegetated riparian buffers that are 200 to 300 feet or more, particularly on larger rivers. We understand that a larger setback would make some existing development non-conforming, and that altering these developments could trigger site upgrade requirements. This seems appropriate. We also recommend changes to address tree and vegetation planting and removal in the river enhancement overlay zone. First, we believe that the proposed exemptions for tree and vegetation removal should apply only to species identified as nuisance in the Portland plant list. We are also concerned about the potential unintended consequences associated with varying tree size thresholds for city-required tree planting and removals. The draft code states that trees required to be planted for landscaping or tree replacement must be at least a half-inch caliper. However, draft exemptions and standards would allow the removal of trees from 1.5 inch up to 6 and even 12-inch caliper trees without a review. These size differences are creating the perception of a loophole that would allow newly planted trees to be removed before they can grow large enough to be regulated. Staff shared that city-required trees and vegetation plantings would not be exempt and are generally not to be removed. However, given the confusion we've heard, the opportunity for misinterpretation, and the resulting potential for inadvertent tree cutting violations, we recommend making it clear in the code that city-required tree and vegetation plantings may not be removed and that exemptions and standards do not apply to them. Providing more consistent tree size thresholds for planting and removal, extending the reporting period for newly planted trees to 5 years. Third, the Urban Forestry Commission asked the PSC to recommend approaches to improve enforcement of tree and vegetation removal along the river and throughout the South Reach, including the prompt resolution of violations. And lastly, the Urban Forestry Commission asked the seasonal restrictions on tree pruning to prevent harm to nesting birds be applied throughout the river environmental overlay zone, not just in the floodplain riparian buffer area. We also recommend that these restrictions be applied in the city's environmental overlay zones as well. Thank you for the opportunity for the Urban Forestry Commission to provide input on the South Reach Plan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let us switch over to public comment, and I think we'll have time after public comment for us to do a little go round to share thoughts, things we want to elevate as we get ready for our work sessions on this. So we'll begin with I'll call out 3 names and then the next 3 so you know who's coming. Michael Kaplan, Josh Hetrick, and Ruth Spetter will be the first 3. And after them, was there anyone who needs to speak early for children's any reason? Okay. After them will be Thomas Gornick, Jean Gallick, and Louis Lusenberger. And if you could please begin sharing your name, and then we'll have 2 minutes each. So let's start with Michael.
My name is Michael Kaplan, and I live on the 3800 block of Southwest Kelly Avenue, have lived there for 25 plus years, and I'm the president of the South Portland Neighborhood Association. So first of all, thank you for giving myself and other members the opportunity to talk with you tonight. We appreciate it. To start out with, on behalf of the South Portland Neighborhood Association, I would like to stress that South Portland's most treasured asset is our 2-mile stretch of accessible riverfront. And how the natural, scenic, and recreational resources are managed will deeply affect us. So we strongly recommend these changes to the plans, which will echo somewhat what has just been said. We would like to see we would like to increase the Greenway setback to 100 feet. Because of its high resource value, the South Reach merits far more than the proposed 50-foot setback to preserve and protect it now and for the future. We strongly recommend a minimum of 100-foot setback. Its significant ecological values include critical habitat for fish and migratory birds. It is an important floodplain. 75% of the land and water is designated as special habitat. It is our best and perhaps last opportunity to preserve and protect this stretch of the river and its resources. 2, we
We'll
want
need
to strengthen.
just to warn you, we finished a little bit more, but we're running out of time. Thanks.
Sorry?
We're at 2 minutes.
You're at 2 minutes.
Yes, so if you could wrap up,
Okay.
that'd be great.
Want to strengthen the revegetation regulations. Replacement trees should be larger than half a foot. We would like to recommend remedial planning to be done within a specific time window, and we would like to require a minimum 3-year maintenance plan. And I'm going to wrap up quickly. 3, we want to move the Greenway review to the Planning and Sustainability Commission. 4, development and urban design. We want to recommend limiting the height and FAR of properties that are within the setback to the 2018 size. If property wants to redevelop, the structure should move outside the setback to increase in either FAR or height. And finally, 5, we believe we are not in support of the use of community design standards within the river overlay zone. It is of utmost importance that development integrates sensitively with the river. The community standards.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. Sorry.
Okay.
Do you have this in writing?
I do, yes.
Okay, that'd be great to share it with us.
Okay.
Thank you. It's in the great.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Josh?
you so much. And
Thank you.
I'll drop it off with the person on my right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Josh.
Hi. Josh Hetrick speaking on behalf of the Brooklyn Action Corps Neighborhood Association. We support many elements of this plan, and we've submitted some detailed specifics in writing, but overall, we recommend that the plan is not adopted without amendments because we believe that the plan's current commitments towards restoring Brooklyn's river access of the 6 to 20 year time frame are not sufficient or timely enough to fulfill the 2040 vision of the plan. As you probably know, Brooklyn is the only neighborhood in the project area that lacks any sort of direct access to the river. It flows through, but not to the neighborhood. We've seen, we have over the last 80 years or so, the neighborhood had its connection to the river reduced and then eliminated and then promised to be brought back, but then so far not delivered. So a lot of my neighbors have seen this process unfold, and hearing the current timeline of 6 to 20 years sounds a lot like 20 years, which sounds a lot like never. So the last significant effort towards this that happened was before I was born. I'm rounding towards 40, and some of my neighbors just had children, and their children are looking to maybe graduate high school before we even take action to start reestablishing this. And we, acknowledge there are difficulties in the geography and jurisdictions and so forth, but we think with a firm commitment and moving the actions back up to the next 5-year timeline, we can start to hone in and figure out what we really need to get to the 2040 vision. The discussion draft did have them in next 5 years. They got pushed back. We just recommend moving those back up to next 5 years so we can really dig in and figure out what we need to do in that short time frame to make this happen by 2040.
Great. Thank you very much.
Commissioners, my name is Ruth Spetter, and I'm here to speak about my own property at 12410 Southwest Riverside Drive. This has been a huge task. It's been really stressful in trying to deal with all the documentation, and I've gone through as much of it as I can. My neighbor, who spent a lot of time on the documents and actually brought up a lot of good discrepancies and so forth, is so demoralized he's not here. I'm still hopeful. I'm still trying. My request to you is to leave the environmental zoning that is on my property today there and not do what staff is proposing, and I will show you that in a minute. The reason is that what staff is proposing is basically to completely cover my property with environmental zoning, more than the county ever did. It's devastating for me. I'm 70 years old. Being able to sell that property for a reasonable sum is necessary for my future. That's not a criteria, but what I'm here to tell you is that the existing zoning is so large that it is achieving the goals that the planning people are trying to achieve. There is no need for this intensified zoning. There are no changes physically on the property. It has been visible forever from the city's property, which is right next door, and all the trees are old. They've been there forever. I've been there forever. I've been there about 40 years. There is contrary to the regulations. All these regulations that you just heard about that they've relied upon have a focus of the river and the river bank and the river uses. My property sits more than 100 feet uphill. On its west end is Highway 43. At the bottom of my property is a train tunnel and some tracks. I do not go to the river. I have no access to the river. I have no trails on my property, nothing along the lines. And I have looked at, and I have submitted written material that does this in more detail. I've looked at Goal 15. It is strictly looking at the river. Metro's, I think it's Title 13, the city's regulations as well. They all talk about wanting to protect floodplain, wanting to protect all of the setbacks and things like that. So I can see that the light is flashing, but I'm asking you to make the difficult decision to allow my property to remain in the environmental zoning that it was. I have a little packet of photos that I think you've been given, and it shows the city property. They call it a park. It's full of debris, broken fences. There is no public access. The majority of that property close to me that abuts is a wide open, steep site. There are no trees. Canopy is what I was told was the main reason. There is no canopy. The property that what I'm asking you to do is keep the zoning down towards the end where I have some trees and the city has some trees, and that's what the county did before, and that's what makes sense. So since my time is almost up.
Yeah, I'm going to actually ask, Mike has one question for you. Can we do that? And Jeff too?
Yeah, I want a clarification. It sounds to
go.
me like you're referring to the environmental zone update as opposed to the South Reach plan.
No, because this is what my property is under the county.
Okay.
This is what the city wants to do.
Jeff, we're going to go really quickly, and then we'll have
real
to move
quick,
to the next
can
person.
you briefly, because we're trying to move along, but could you quickly summarize the regulatory difference between what you're asking for and what South Reach would impose on you? What are the key impacts?
South Reach would impose this, so that would mean that.
No, but tell me what is this? I can see the visual. What does that mean in terms of your ability
You need to ask staff exactly, but it means that there is more of my property, even though it's open and does not provide canopy, abuts a highway, will have to come in for regulatory review no matter what.
Thanks for bringing this attention. I think we'll have to ask staff for this when we later
Yes,
on.
I'm sure
Okay.
So that's why I'm asking. I'm saying this does it already. You are not uncovered. Your objectives are not unmet. And
Thank you very much.
That's what I'm asking. All right, thank you.
Right. Next will be Jeannie Galick, Micah Meskel, and Louis Lusenberger. What did it say? Did I miss one?
What happened to Tom?
Oh, Tom Gornick. Did I miss Tom Gornick? I'm sorry. You're right. I flipped over a page too early. Is Tom here? Thank you. Tom, you're first, actually, if that's all right with you.
That's fine with me. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Thank you for having me. I'm Thomas Gornick. I live at 0422 Southwest California. I come in support of the river plan with some updates and alterations, some of which have already been mentioned, but I want to reinforce them. First, increase the Greenway setback to 100 feet. Less than 100 feet allows developers to encroach and limit important habitat and recreational use by our citizens. We already know very clearly from the report that the South Reach contains significant ecological areas, including habitat for salmon. It is part of the Pacific Flyway. It's important for the floodplain. The South Reach merits far more than the proposed 50 feet setback to preserve and protect it now and for the future. So we strongly recommend the 100-foot setback. We need to strengthen the revegetation regulations to require review and remedial planting to be done within a specific time window, require a 3-year maintenance plan to ensure that the vegetation, when done, is established, require replanting with native species after nuisance species are removed, and require existing properties to come into landscape compliance within the next 5 years. Today, we have property owners who clear cut the river right down to the water line and leave nothing but bare grass and no vegetation for habitat. The Willamette River is a natural resource, but more important, can and should be a defining landscape for our community. As a city and community, we should take our cues from our Native American communities and treat it as a living resource that brings life and good living to all of Portland. Every one of us, including developers, should understand that if we embrace the river as a natural wonder, all our lives and property will be of greater value. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jeannie?
My name is Jeannie Galick. I live at 7005 Southwest Virginia, and these are my brief but spectacular concerns. Increase the Greenway to 100 feet. The setback, everybody's given you good reasons, but the setback really is a commitment to the future. This environment will eventually enlarge, hopefully, and better sustain more people and a healthier habitat. On encroachment, there is no good reason to allow even a 5-foot encroachment. The suggested quid pro quo will not appear or function as a public space. The goal is to increase the setback and not to fragment it. On non-conforming uses within the setback, limit the height and FAR of existing properties to their 2018 size. If a property wants to increase, it needs to move outside the new setback. Limit grandfathering. When only a foundation remains, replacement structures should be considered new development and moved outside the new setback. And lastly, strengthen those landscaping requirements and violations. 2 problems now exist. Trees are rarely allowed to grow to the 1.5-foot DBH before they are cut down, so they don't trigger replacement. And number 2, the replacement trees, as you've heard from the urban forester, are only required to be a 1/2-foot DBH. So it means that they can be legally and continually removed. We would recommend, A, that severe pruning should be considered removal. Require a minimum 3-year maintenance plan to ensure that vegetation has an opportunity to get established and to thrive. Require replanting with native species even when removing nuisance plants. If the disturbed area is not in compliance. And
Can we wrap up a little bit?
We really need enforcement of these regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Louis?
Oh, me?
You're up.
My name is Louis Lustenberger. I'm the chairman of the board of the River Point Homeowners Association. That's a condominium located on the western bank of the Willamette River at the foot of Pendleton Street in the Johns Landing area of Portland. Our board has submitted written testimony asking that the Greenway Trail West, as presently described at page 105 of the current draft of the South Reach Plan, be denominated a Scenic Corridor in the final South Reach Plan. The draft plan defines a scenic corridor as a linear transportation corridor, valued for its multiple views, viewpoints, and visual focal features. That definition fits the Greenway Trail West precisely, and that is why we want to attach that definition to the Green Trail West by labeling it a scenic corridor. If designated a scenic corridor in the final plan, we believe it will more permanently provide the citizens of Portland with an extended path where they can walk the river and enjoy the panoramic views of the city, the river, and the wildlife on it for an extended period of time. And we believe that that result is one worth achieving. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for bearing with that distraction. I'm not sure who's calling us right now.
I beg your pardon? I'm sorry.
And thank you for bearing with that distraction.
Well, that's okay.
Mike, you have a question?
Quick question for Jeannie. Violations have come up a couple times. In your experience, as an advocate, as a from your neighborhood perspective, how long has it taken to get some of these violations addressed, resolved?
Well, we haven't had any violations resolved. One of the violations that we finally were able to prove was in 2016, and it still is unresolved. It has just gone back and forth. We just never seem to get any solutions.
Okay. Thanks. So next up will be, thank you, everyone. Micah. Sure, Steph.
A quick question: is a scenic, and maybe this is a question to you, Mike. Is there, as a scenic corridor, the same as a linear park?
No, I don't have an opinion on that, frankly.
Okay.
I do have a very major concern about a scenic corridor, however.
Okay, we'll bring that up afterwards. So Micah Mescal will be next, and then Ed Newbegin, and then Mo Dindral. After them will be Robert Bernstein, Ronald Reagan, and Ted Labby. So, Micah.
I'm Micah Mescal, and I'm representing Portland Audubon Society today. We agree with many others that overall we feel the South Reach plan is going in the right direction, but we feel it falls short in a couple spaces. And we submitted extensive comments that I hope you guys can take a look at through your work sessions, and I'm going to touch on a couple of the high-level issues. So the first is we feel that the 100-foot setback is the right number. Sound science demonstrates it. Our own Bureau of Environmental Services has come forward with that as the recommendation. It will increase our resiliency and the ecological aspirations that this plan moves forward. So we think it should move to 100 feet. In addition, we feel that there should be mechanisms to gradually move development out of the setback, both regulatory and non-regulatory. Examples could be the Johnson Creek Wheeling Cellar Program or other mechanisms of similar route. We feel that the light pollution provisions are inadequate throughout the plan, and they should be applied to the entire plan to help reduce negative impacts to wildlife and humans. We should, removal of greenway vegetation is a chronic issue in this area. As was noted earlier, we agree with the Urban Forestry Commission's suggestions on shoring up loopholes and bringing some more clarity, and to increase fines and enforcement when those are removed. In regards to Waverly Country Club, it is a parcel that is south of the plan area, but is contiguous with most of it. It is currently not held to any of these standards, and we suggest that it should be. It receives city services. Currently, it's 140 acres of significant habitat, both upland and in water, and we feel there are some routes that can go forward to bring this property, which is unincorporated Clackamas County, into the service area. And lastly, we hope that in your upcoming work sessions that you're able to bring forward some subject area experts, whether that's internally from the Bureau of Environmental Services to answer questions about setbacks and other issues, but also the Urban Forestry Commission, the city's Tribal Relations Director, or other BPS staff who I think can help move us in the right direction.
Thank you very much. And you are either Ed or Mo.
Say Mo. Pardon?
Are you Ed or Mo?
Ed.
Okay, your turn. And if there's a Mo Dindral in the audience, they'll be next.
Yeah, I'm Ed Newbegin. I have a condominium at River Point, and I'm on the board of River Point. I wanted to talk to you about the riprap bank, which is along River Point. When River Point was constructed, which was the first development in the south area of Portland on the old macadam, or I can't remember the name of the lumber site, which was a derelict site. They added a lot of soil to the site to bring it to the proper elevation. Well, fill soil, as it's called, is very vulnerable to eroding in a flood because it's just put down, there's no strength to it. So at the time, they installed a riprap bank, and the riprap bank was designed to protect the entire project from the fill eroding and destroying the project, essentially. I included passed out this picture to show you the extent of the riprap bank. It is not the way it looks today. It was taken years ago. I don't know when this picture, I tried to find out, I couldn't find out. But you can see what's called an armored riprap bank, which is designed to protect an area from flooding. And this area is very, you can't put trees in a riprap bank, because what happens with trees, particularly large ones, the roots grow down and move the rocks. So they make the rocks vulnerable in a flood. And secondly, the trees are on rocks, so they're not stable. And so what happens is they pull out or are torn out in a flood. Their roots tear out and they tear out the bank. So we have this is what the Johns Landing Owners Association is all about. That is, they were established to protect this bank. And today it looks very different and has green and has growth on it and everything. But we cut it back every year to protect this riprap bank.
All right, thank you. And Mo, if I get your name right?
To the Honorable Commissioners and everyone else in this room, thank you for allowing me to express my concerns.
Can you please start with your name? Sorry, because I don't think I probably got it quite right.
I'm sorry?
Could you please start with your name?
It's Mo Dendrell. It's Mohinder Dendrell. I own a house at 10224 Southwest Riverside Drive. Mm-hmm. I just found a neighbor. Listen, I've always had the philosophy of keep it simple, keep it simple, keep it simple. If it doesn't involve safety, if it doesn't involve our fellow creatures that we have an obligation to respect, migratory birds, fish, deer, leave us alone. The regulations you guys have in place right now are mind-boggling. I just went through a Greenway review that you helped create with your famous governor 30 years ago. It's mind-boggling. The things that I had to go through, the cost. I'm a homeowner. I work an hourly job. The cost to a national builder, international builder, chump change. They burp it at lunch, $5,000, $10,000. For me, it's a huge expense. Just to go through the Greenway review cost me close to $20,000. And the problems that it caused me would, it's shameful. Like I said, if it doesn't involve safety, fire issues, can't get fire trucks in, if it doesn't involve our fellow creatures, especially in those wooded areas next to the rivers and stuff, leave us alone. Let us do what we want to do. Setbacks are important. If this regulation goes into place, my front setback would go from 0 to 15. My side setback would go from 3 to 10. It would make no difference to anybody but to me and to the Bureau of Development and Services. Mind-boggling of an institution that you guys have created. For homeowners, it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare to deal with those people. We don't understand the regulations. They do. They know how to work around them. They know how to impose them. They know how to use these little backdoor tactics to get what they want. You guys really need to be careful of the regulations you put into place.
All right. Thank you very much.
And like I said, keep it simple. If it doesn't involve safety, if it doesn't involve our fellow creatures, leave the homeowners alone.
Okay. Thanks for sharing their perspective. Thanks for coming out.
Let the developers deal with these complicated things. For the simple homeowners, please.
I'm going to have to move on. Thanks very much. The last three cards I have are from Ted Labby, Ronald Reagan, and Robert Bernstein. Please come on up. And if there's anyone else who had meant to testify, please get a card to Julie, and we will pull you up after this.
Good evening.
Ted, yes.
Good evening. Ted Labby with the Urban Green Spaces Institute. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I submitted kind of a rather long list of suggestions for improvements through the map app today. So I'm just going to talk about a few things, a few highlights. First of all, thank you to staff for the work that they've done on this. It is an improvement over what we have. We're encouraged to see the city has prioritized protection of shallow water habitats for fish and wildlife, recognize the potential for a mitigation bank and private property buyouts in floodplains, highlight the need for a comprehensive program protection and restoration plan for Ross Island, Oaks Bottom, Holgate Channel complex, and proposes new landscaping and vegetation requirements. However, we do have some concerns, and we do think that the plan needs to be strengthened in a number of fundamental ways, and my comments detail those. I'm just going to talk about a few today. First of all, and most importantly, we would like to see, echoing earlier comments, we would like to see the Greenway setback increased to 100 feet to protect riparian zones. And a question, I heard Micah earlier talk about dialogue, just a basic question I would like to hear from BPS staff, to what extent they considered the Bureau of Environmental Services recommendations that were founded on science, and why are they not including those considerations in this plan? And that's an outstanding question I think we haven't heard the answer to. The city could provide some additional incentives to move future development out of the Greenway. New construction within the Greenway setback, height and floor area ratios could be limited to their current size, and we could incentivize people to move out of harm's way. We'd like to see Greenway reviews move over to the Planning Sustainability Commission. I think that's the rightful place for those things. A couple other little quick things. We'd like to see the city introduce, not just consider, the development of incentives for reducing impervious surfaces within the river overlay zone, and a willing seller program for flood-prone private properties. Not just the idea of it, but let's get to it. I'll just say one last thing because I'm out of time. Boat wakes. Why aren't we talking about speed limits in the river? Why aren't we talking about the city taking up speed limits and linking speed limits as a way to reduce boat wake erosion and connecting it to PBOT's current Vision Zero for our streets? Why aren't we considering that on the South Reach plan? Wish I could talk to you about more great ideas.
You submitted written testimony, I believe, so we'll take a look at that. Thank you. Ronald?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Ronald Reagan. I'm speaking just on behalf of myself and my family. We have a condominium in the Landing Square, Building A, Landing Square, not far from River Point. I too was involved with the original Greenway Committee. I was on the committee for many years. I remember all kinds of discussions about the differences between cities and farmland and how many different users who live and use the river in many different places ought to be treated. And parks up and down the river, one plan, even in a smaller area, doesn't necessarily fit all. And the way I see this being done, if I'm interpreting it correctly, you're not taking into account the wide variety of users and different types of people and from different locations and so forth that use this small stretch of the path. And I'm talking particularly now in my comments on the path. I have submitted a letter to you that you'll have a chance to review. The idea it's clear in my mind from the discussions that when you're in the farmland and people are on the river, they look out and they see the natural habitat and they don't see a bunch of docks and an occasional house and so forth. There would be parks in the cities particularly, and we did a lot of discussions about the Cottage Grove and Salem and Portland and so forth. And then in the more densely habited areas, you would have a whole different type of user, and they'd be largely people who would be walking and jogging and biking and so forth, and they want to see out, not from the river, but out to the river, and they want to see what's going on in the river. And that's part of their entertainment and exercise. And this particular area is close enough to the city to actually be reached by people who, by walking, by biking, I'd be very happy to see you control the speed of the bikes, by the way. And that's a whole different when you allow.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up if you can.
I agree very much with the comments made by River Point, but the people who walk along where we live look out, and they don't want to go and look out of a little point where 50 people are looking over each other's shoulders and trying to see what's going on in the river. They look at it the entire time they walk and they bike.
Okay.
And I think that needs to be taken into account, so that you know that one type of riverbank and riverfront does not fit even all the full South Reach area.
Thank you very much. Yeah. A quick question, Mike, and then we have one more.
Very quick. So I'm curious whether you would, I know the staff report, and I agree with this, suggested that trees, rather than being one continuous corridor, could be planted in groves so that as you go along the Greenway, you have ample views of the river from the Greenway Trail. Is that something you'd support?
Well, first of all, I have the same concern exactly that Ed voiced. You don't put trees in riprap, and either wind or fast water or both will create havoc eventually. So I don't think you put trees in those areas at all. I think if you want to have some kind, and I don't see any great wonderful need for blackberry vines, as a matter of fact, even if they grow very easily there. I don't object to some kind of greenery there and just maintained and kept down so that the people who are jogging and biking can see over it. But I've never really thought about clumps of trees, to be honest with you.
Okay.
But for the most part, I really just don't see. It's not a very. It's
I'm gonna have
just
to, thanks for
tiny
answering the
little
question.
piece
I
of
think
a great big river.
I'm going to move us along.
Can you go a little quarter of a mile without a bunch of trees? Yes, if you can.
Okay. Thank you, Robert.
Hi. I'm Bob Bernstein, Portland resident, 51 years. I've been a salmon trout enhancement program volunteer, and I also do amphibian surveys. So I would like to see the river set back at least 100 feet, probably 150 or 200. A lot of critters need upland habitat, salamanders, frogs. They don't spend all their time in water, folks. I would like to see, when I was in a focus group for this, probably a year or two ago, it struck me and others that there was some really good habitat available, but it was like next to parking and things like that could be bought up and brought into a high quality environment area with some plantings and stuff. So I would like to see that. I'd like to see enhanced enforcement. If you're going to have trees being cut, if you're going to have dogs around, I'm in Laurelhurst and I'm in Mount Tabor Park a fair amount, and there needs to be enforcement of dog policies if you're going to hope to have some sort of wildlife habitat. So you're going to have to build in some enforcement. Let's see. Everything else has been said by Audubon's. So my last thing would be, sometimes you have 2-minute testimony, sometimes 3. There are integers in between the two. There's 2.5. Have you ever thought about this? And it's not just you, it's city council. It's just, it's a thought.
Thank you for the suggestion.
May I make one very quick comment?
I'm going to have to pause this here. I've learned that sometimes if we start at 2 and I get flexible, then sometimes we get people up to 3 and 4 and down to 2. So I will try and have more consistency as we go forward. So thank you everyone for testifying this evening. I'm going to ask Debbie to come on back up for staff, or Jeff. I'm not sure who will be coming up, but all come up. That'd be great. So I will. Sorry, thank you for the reminder. I always appreciate reminders. So I will close the oral testimony. Did I am out of cards, so I had asked a couple. Perhaps there was a. Okay, please raise your hand if you have not spoken and you were expecting to speak. Yes.
That's the process. But Mary.
But Mary, you can bring it up to Julie, and we can.
Can I do it afterwards?
Yes.
Yes, you can. Thank you. I did not know, since I had no more slips here. I thought that we were done with public comment, but you are welcome to share 2 minutes, 2 minutes of comment, and then we'll bring
I
staff up
thought
after
there
that.
was
Thank you.
a list that I missed signing up for, but in any case, yeah. So I'm Mary Vogel, and I live and work in downtown Portland, but I used to live further in the south, with several southwest neighborhoods where I commuted by bicycle along the Greenway Trail on a regular basis into the city. I have wanted to say that first, I did submit written testimony along these lines, but I really appreciated Portland Audubon's line by line amendments to the plan, and I hope you will pay really close attention to those. I mean, it's lengthy, but the plan itself is something like 800 pages, so of course it should be. I agree with everything they've written. Of course, I am an Audubon member, but I also want to say I also agree with Ted Laby's comments for Urban Green Spaces Institute. I think he did an excellent job and covered a few points that Audubon didn't, so please pay close attention to that. If I were giving awards, I would give one to Tammy Harper for perhaps the most poetic testimony, though very brief. It really hit at the heart of protecting wildlife and showed her intimate knowledge of the wildlife that's there. And I would give one to Mike Hauk for his visuals on the plan. I mean, he submitted excellent photos of some of the atrocities that have been committed in terms of the Greenway. So I just want to especially point out those testimonies, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, and thank you everyone who came out
Life for.
on a beautiful evening to share your thoughts. I saw a lot of note taking among commissioners, so we'll definitely take this to heart. And now I will close the oral part of testimony. Staff, please come on up and join us. That would be great. And we can have a chance for PSC members to throw a few questions your way if we have them, and then do a go around for any initial feedback we have on this code update. So let's start with any PSC questions. Ben.
Well, I guess probably one of the items we heard about the most is the extension of the Greenway setback to 100 feet. I'd like to perhaps know a little bit more about BES recommendation and a little bit more background of the reason why it went from 25 to 50 instead of other numbers that have been thrown out, especially at 100. Another question about the connection between the Brooklyn neighborhood and the water. Maybe a little bit more background there in terms of the timeline, as well as probably the physical barriers that there are there. I think it's pretty clear that it's a little bit of a challenge.
Who'd like to take those? Should we take them as we go, or
Just
collect them all first?
I think we're just
Yeah.
collecting feedback, and we're getting ready
Sounds
for the.
good.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeff, do you have any follow-up?
Well, one, we already mentioned the follow-up on the Spetter property, just to better understand what are the issues there. And then also following up on Ben on the access from the Brooklyn neighborhood to the river. The gentleman who spoke said it was originally in a 1 to 5 year time frame, and then it got moved to a 6 to 20 year time frame. If that's correct, what replaced it? What did you guys decide was a higher priority than access to the Brooklyn neighborhood? Or what was the reason it started out in a shorter time frame, got moved to a longer time frame? What led you guys to switch it?
Katie?
Yeah. Well, I
I would really like to know more about the 100-foot versus the 50. That's really one of the biggest things. And I also wanted to, there's trails within, it, there's trails all along the river, and you wrote about that extensively in the plan. I've read the plan, but now I'm realizing, okay, I'm not sure I completely understand everything. So, is there does the plan regulate the trails? Yes. Okay. So does it set like a standard for the trails, like how wide they should be? It seems like for me, they're one of the more important aspects of the whole plan. And so I'm just really interested, and I'm really interested in them working for everyone, because as the region gets denser, there's going to be a lot more people on these trails. They're beautiful trails, and they need to work for everyone. So I want to make sure that there was a lot of testimony online that had to do with how wide they actually should be, and how they should be designed so that bicyclists could go past walkers without everyone feeling threatened. And let's see. And then this 100-foot setback, how does that relate to the trails? That was the piece that, as I was listening today, I was kind of going, how does that work? Does that have anything to do with the trails? Are the trails always within the setback, or are they above the setback? And I mean, some of what people were talking about, I'm sure you're going to be following up on the enforcement for the trees. I am interested in a certain things like the Ross Island. What are the plans for Ross Island? Is that changing as we speak, or has that been bought, or what kinds of plans are going on there? And then there's one other thing. Oh, that riprap bank. I'm not sure if that was mentioned in the plan or not. I can't remember, but just how you guys are looking at that and what your recommendations are on that.
So a lot of my questions have already been asked, so I won't reiterate them, but I am curious to hear a little bit more about the revegetation regulations. Whose purview does that fall under? It sounds like there isn't a lot of capacity to enforce, but it sounds like enforcement is really necessary. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And of course, I also have questions about the 100-foot versus the 50-foot setback. That's it.
I'll skip me and go at the end. Mike.
Okay. Well, I've shared a lot of my questions and comments with staff already. The ones that I haven't addressed that directly are, I really do think the whole Waverly question is huge, given the amount of land and riverbank there. So to the extent that one of Audubon's recommendations, if there is a path to actually engage Clackamas County and get something along Waverly, that would be huge. Very interested to hear more about the biop and the whole floodplain issue, and thinking about areas like Miles Place that have been flooded repeatedly, and there was brought up a willing sellers program such as they had out still have, I think, out at Johnson Creek. If properties are repeatedly flooded, does it make sense for them to be rebuilt, and what are the opportunities for reclaiming a lot of their area for the floodplain through a willing sellers program? Those are the main ones that I didn't touch on already.
Thanks.
So add me to the list of folks who are interested in the rationale for 50 feet versus 100 feet. I'm very interested to understand that. Join Mike in asking about Waverly. It seems like just a huge amount of land that would benefit from similar regulations to the rest of the South Reach. To the comments from the Brooklyn neighborhood, I read the written testimony, which included a history of that area, and I took it to understand that there was a street vacation that removed their access and was intended to be replaced by another access that never happened. And if true, that's an invalid street vacation, because one of the conditions for a street vacation is you don't remove a transportation function. Well, clearly a transportation function got removed, so to me that suggests we should have some priority on restoring that access. And I think it's not just a question of access, it's also a transportation issue, because if you're in Brooklyn, if you want to get downtown, you have to navigate across Powell Boulevard at some point, and a path to the Springwater would give you a way to avoid that. So to me, it's an important part of the bicycle network, and I'd want to assign some additional priority to that for that purpose. Expanding a little bit on what Katie said about the multi-use paths on the west side of the river, I've ridden those on my bicycle any number of times. The comments in written testimony that there are visibility problems, that there are right angles in the path that are very difficult to navigate, and that the path simply isn't wide enough in many areas to function effectively as a multi-use path are quite correct. So I'm interested in policies that would cause that path to get upgraded and made more useful over time. And I'll stop there for now.
Thanks.
I mean, the nice thing about going second to last is that they're all taken. I agree. 100-foot setback, yes. Waverly, yes. Also, I mean, I once led a ride to look at just how bad the Willamette Greenway path was as a multi-use path. So yes. A couple of others. I don't know if it was the same as the Army Corps of Engineers conversation around floodplain we had in the last briefing, but I'd love to hear an update on where that is in the grant process. So just that wasn't in testimony, but I'd love an update. I'm now fascinated about your thoughts on Scenic Corridor, so stay tuned. The FAR and height for setback I'm interested in, just to continue that conversation. Normally I'm all about FAR and height, maintaining that. As someone who has been through a tsunami, I feel a strong interest in having a conversation about what unexpectedly happens to people when water happens. And then, yeah, speed limits. Fascinating conversation I'd love to have. Who sets them? Are they set? I think, and then this also, this was just touched on in the briefing, but in reading the plan to talk about the joint office conversations around unhoused or undocked populations being outside the purview of this river plan was unsatisfying to me, and I would love to have a conversation about what is the conversation we need to be having in that riverfront community, and it is a community. That's all I got.
Thanks. Well, I am agreeing with what I've heard from my fellow commissioners. I will add one new piece. I've not read all the written testimony, but in one piece that I have read, it's talking about priority of use of the river itself, and it got me thinking about how the transportation plan we have that we've worked on, we prioritize different modes of transportation in a prioritized order. And I know that we are not the venue that determines that for the Willamette, but there are things, just like transportation, we can influence it with land use. There may be instances here where we can influence the sort of the pecking order of uses in the river. So one idea is the provision of docks for motorized craft might encourage more of them, and we might want to have more access points for people who would be sailing, swimming, or paddling in the river. Another would be to weigh in on the Marine Board recommendations that's coming up. So I'm hopeful that in the sequencing of hearings, we have a chance to get that in ahead of the briefing there. And as I look through, maybe there may be other ways, but I really like the idea of prioritizing river use for those people who are going to be doing it under their own human power, obviously animals as well, and then having single occupancy motorboats be pretty far down the priority rate. And I know we can't influence that directly, but looking for ways we could steer that, I'd be interested. Then I think that as the end, so we're going to extend the written testimony deadline until this Wednesday at 5 p.m. So we're not going to Fridays. Sometimes we do because staff has a huge amount to absorb, and this gives them some time to digest it. So we will close the written record Wednesday, February 28th. Do you have a quick comment? Yeah, go for it.
Actually, I was hoping we could extend the written testimony deadline a little longer than that. I know some of us anyway, are going to be out on the river, on the Greenway, and I'm hopeful that maybe what might come out of that is, in addition to listening to testimony, that there may be some additional information coming to us.
So would this be some of us meeting commissioners, or, well, it seems like the commissioners will still deliberate afterward. This is public testimony. And I've with staff. So is it okay? Staff's recommended that we cut public testimony off, written testimony on the 28th.
26th.
Sorry,
26th. Tomorrow.
Wednesday, February. I'm just reading the notes here. Sorry, the notes say the 28th, but it's really tomorrow, 5 p.m. Sorry about that. That would be written testimony. So if you want to push back hard, you can tell me. But the reason, the rationale staff's given is that they just need a lot of time. They're under a quick deadline after this. And I think that in terms of our tour, which I look forward to, that's for our information, and that doesn't count as written testimony.
That's correct. You can bring your experiences to the next conversation, on March 10th.
Okay, and there will be chances, and our deadline for submitting amendments is sometime. So staff want to give us a little feedback on when that would be? We haven't really talked about an officers meeting, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but I assume it's after we've done the tour.
Yes, we'd like to hear your feedback, your proposed amendments as soon as possible. We've got our next session is in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to hear what you think, go through all the testimony, hear what you think, and then prepare things for the next meeting. So it just doesn't give us a lot of time.
Okay.
I yield.
Okay, so Michael, I would like to have the chance to do the tour before I send in any kind of suggestions for amendments, personally.
Now, is that going to comport with BES's request for an extension for written testimony?
They requested the end of the day tomorrow, so. Yeah.
Okay, so BES is okay with this. So I will close written testimony as of 5 p.m. tomorrow. Reminder that we'll continue the project to March 10th. And unless I'm missing something else, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you.